Okay, I'd like to return to our regular school committee meeting after executive session. Just remind everybody this is being recorded, so please silence your devices. And we will start with the Pledge of Allegiance. Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Do we have any public comment tonight? Just please state your name and address. Thanks. Yes, thanks. Yeah.
Hi, my name is Mark Bohr. I live at 10 Heath Circle in town, and I'm also the poet laureate of the town of North Andover. I just started this year.
Congratulations, welcome.
And so I'm here kind of in that function that you may know that the Board of Selectmen this week officially proclaimed that Columbus Day would have two names this year. That would be Columbus Day and Indigenous Peoples Day. And so I went to the Board of Selectmen meetings in support of that. And as a poet, I also wrote a little poem that I thought I might share if you'll
Sure.
bear with me on this. And I tried to have a little bit of fun with it, and I also wanted to try to put it in perspective, you know, for someone who might be coming into this and thinking, why are we doing this? What is this all about? So here we go, and I hope it's short enough. It's time for Indigenous Peoples Day. First, it's not true that I can only speak in rhyme. I can't talk that way on cue, and who has the time? I can only say what I say, and for that I'm not sorry. Poets arrange words this way when we want to tell a story. Columbus explored, for that he's rightly known, but as we've learned some more, our knowledge has only grown. In the story we all learned, some chapters were left out. Other people here, they yearn to be heard without having to shout. Columbus changed the world, and in our alma maters, one thing will never change. He'll remain an important man. But as history has unfurled, the distance has made some things clearer. As we get farther from that 1492 meeting, we're seeing a bigger picture. That's why we don't want the lesson shortchanged. We want our kids to learn to truly understand. We want our kids to read from all the missing chapters. We want our kids to hear from every voice completely. We want our kids to know that books can have many authors, and we want our kids to hear the story of our entire human family. If that means we change the name from time to time of some of our favorite holidays, then I believe, if I may claim, we shall be a little better. And in the end, I believe we shall even be okay.
Thank you.
Thanks for bearing with me. And if you haven't had a chance, I don't know if you've had a chance to see the proclamation that was worded. I mean, yeah, I just think this is so wonderful. And I'm going to have my son, who's a senior in high school, ask him to take it to school, because it's something that, like in a history class or an English class, it should be read, because there's a lot to think about here in terms of our relationship to the people who lived here before, and I think it's a great thing for our schools to look at this and reflect on that. And so that's why I'm here. Thank you.
I think we'll see you Saturday, right?
Yes, right, Holly, right, at the marching band
Yes.
competition this weekend. So I guess I can also invite everyone, since I'm on North Andover Music Association. 18 marching bands are coming to town starting at 4 o'clock this Saturday, Walsh Stadium.
We'll see you there.
Yeah, thanks.
Thank you.
Any other public comment? Okay, seeing none. We don't have recognition tonight, so we'll move to our student reports.
Before you begin, I do want to say, Jack, I was very pleased to see you get a parking spot.
I was too.
We had nothing to do with it. I saw the student council pictures of that, but when I saw your name posted, I was
Yeah,
like,
it was kind of ironic. That's what Mr. Dunn told me when he handed it to me. So, yeah.
Yeah. So yeah,
Well
so
done.
ended up being able to give some juniors some more parking spots, which I think it was kind of cool because it was like, I remember I was there when they were picked and I knew I didn't really know a single person that I picked, so it was just kind of interesting to see like all the juniors who put in their names, and it was also kind of interesting. I think we picked like the first 3 people who ended up putting their names in just by chance, so I think it was just kind of a lucky little thing. And then for more recent news, this week is Spirit Week at the high school, which is pretty exciting. I was like, I know it's earlier than normal because homecoming is pretty early, so I just think it's really cool to be able to get school spirit in like right away. Like you just transferred and now we're getting you involved. I know that the dress-ups have been pretty popular. For the first time, we sent like a survey out to some of the kids to kind of get like their feedback. Like we brainstormed and then wanted to actually know what people wanted to dress up as. So then Monday we did the popular pajama day because who doesn't want to wear pajamas to school? And then Tuesday, for the first time ever, we had Vine Day / Meme Day. So that one was an interesting one. And then Wednesday was college and sports day, which was kind of interesting just to see kind of where people had visited, especially as seniors, because it might not have been your first choice, but you know, if you have the shirt, you probably like it a little bit. So that was a cool conversation starter. Then today was America Pride Day. And then tomorrow's class colors, as well as the pep rally and the homecoming game and the homecoming dance.
Yeah, it's a big day tomorrow. Full itinerary. Going back to last week, though, we had our football game last week. We won 14-7 against Central, so that was pretty good. It was fun being there. Other things that have happened recently: the golf team is 6-0-1. They had their first tie, I think, in a while, but they're still technically undefeated. That's a long-standing record that they're very proud of. One of my friends who's in my pre-cal class mentions it a lot, how they're undefeated, which is great. Yeah.
And then, I mean, obviously, since the last time we were here, the gas fires were a big thing that happened. So I just thought I would mention, I thought it was really good how the school handled, days off and everything, because I know, Friday was so hectic. I mean, Thursday was hectic, and then Friday was, dealing with the aftermath. I know I was out of town picking up my sister, and then we were staying at a hotel because they're like, don't come home. And I was like, if there's school tomorrow, I'm going to be so late. And so I was really appreciative that we had that day off. And then I also think it was good to then get back to school for the people who didn't have gas, might wanted to get warm, And I know a friend of mine is still without gas, but I think she had mentioned how she's really lucky that she's been able to go to her dad's work or go to the Y, and it's just different things that our town kind of came together to be able to help out, which I just think is kind of cool, despite the bad circumstances for it to happen.
Yeah. So transitioning from gas explosions, the music association, I was just about to talk about the music department. You beat me to it though. So yeah, NESBA's this weekend, starts at 4. I've volunteered at that before. It's awesome, so I hope you guys go. I'm gonna try to go. Also, the chorus department recently performed, it wasn't a live performance, but they recorded a song, I'm not sure if you saw it, called Ukatula, which was for the International Day of Peace last week. They sent it to, I don't know where they sent it, but they sent it out into the internet to, I don't know, see. I think someone's going to make a compilation or something of all the choirs. It's a worldwide thing where choirs from all around the world, from South Africa to, I think Ms. Durkin mentioned China, sang this one song as a corroboration of International Day of Peace. So, yeah. Is that? Yeah. All right. That's it, I think.
Thank you. I'm just going to say very quickly, I've been really impressed with seeing the tweets and things of all the gift cards that, the sporting events and the teams and the students have really kind of helped to gather, and, whether they're distributed from the youth center or, within the school itself. And I think the student council has done some things with that as well. So thank you for your efforts on that. That goes way further than you realize. And it impacts so many students. So
thank you. Yeah. All right.
Yeah. Thank you, guys.
Thanks, folks.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Have a good homecoming tomorrow night.
Okay, next up we have our second public input opportunity for the proposal to name the North Andover High School Wrestling Room. Last meeting we had our first input, and tonight is the second and final one. So if you'd like to come to the microphone.
Good evening, Jack McManus, 391 Stephen Street. I'll simply reiterate what I said back in June. A very deserving honor for Billy Corey, who I indicated was a tremendous student athlete and just a great citizen. And the prior field house had been named after him, so I think it would be a great honor to just rename this wrestling room. He was a New England champ, and just like I said, just a tremendous student athlete and an asset to the community. So I would fully support this. Thank you.
Thank you.
Anyone else? Okay, so I think per our rules, we vote on this next meeting. Is that correct?
Where was that?
Yeah, I know. That's what it looked like.
That, right.
So it's two public,
And then it
Bev
says-
has it in our agenda for next time, so
okay.
I'm relying on.
And then at the next meeting,
Per.
yeah, because I tried to look at that too, and it's a little bit vague, but.
Okay.
Okay, next up, approving the minutes from last meeting.
Sorry.
With- oh,
No.
Should we show up?
you don't need to. I mean, you can if you'd like to, but,
If you'd like to be here.
yeah.
I didn't know if you needed more comment.
No.
We've received
Just vote.
no other.
Right, we can't take more comment next time, so.
Yeah.
We've received no other.
No, and that was
No.
the key thing. I mean,
Right.
we've heard from you, but if other people had other commentary, that was the
Yeah.
big
Right.
reason we have to go through these processes.
And we would take care of the plaque and things of that nature for, if this does happen.
Okay.
We'll take care of
We have the plaque.
I was gonna say, I
Yeah, so
think
we have
I,
the original.
it.
But the plaque says, I believe the plaque says Memorial Fieldhouse. So what
right, we
would
do something new.
You know, our alumni, we have an alumni association wrestling fund, and we would, get a new plaque that said Memorial Wrestling Room,
Right.
Okay.
as opposed to Memorial Fieldhouse, because that's Tug's Fieldhouse, as you know.
As we know, Tug
Yeah.
Cross.
Okay.
Tug.
Thank you.
Thank you,
Thank
gentlemen.
you.
Thank you. Okay, so I will entertain a motion to accept the minutes as presented in the packet.
I will make a motion to accept the minutes as presented in the packet.
I'll second.
Any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Any objections? Should have started that, okay. All right, superintendent's report.
So we have two items in the superintendent's report, and before we start with that, I just want to echo what our students have to say. The community was tremendous in the response to the gas issues and the explosions. To spend a few nights at the shelter, checking in with our families. I can't tell you how many times we needed something where I tweeted it out on behalf of Dickie Valancourt from the selectmen, and he'd say, "We need coffee." Then he'd call me up a half an hour later and say, "Turn the faucet off." They'd have 70 boxes of coffee. But my point being is the majority of the folks bringing the coffee and the things in were our students. So they go out with their parents, get stuff. And I can't say enough about the fire department, the building commissioner, the facilities director, police, the town manager, giving us the ability to check every school that Saturday, 10 hours, each individual school, start up every piece of equipment. Took some serious dedication, but also coordination of getting those folks all together, because you can imagine, we always think of schools as the top priority, but there was a lot going on in this community with firefighters and police from over, all over New England here. And I just want to thank Andrew Mailer for his efforts collaborating with us to make it happen. So that was really just part one. And then part two, I'd like to introduce you folks to my coach tonight. This is Matt King. He is my coach. He's been the superintendent of schools in Lincoln, Sudbury, Wellesley, Carlisle, also the head of a Jewish school in Boston. He was superintendent for 28 years. He's attended over 800 school committee meetings as superintendent. And
That looks pretty good.
That sounds like a sentence.
and he has been invaluable so far in my short time with him. He is the new Carla Bear that you're used to, the new Erwin Blummer that we've had in the last few years. And he's going to talk a little bit about my induction program tonight and him as my coach. So, Matt King.
Yeah, it's really a privilege for me at this point in my life and career to be a coach. and to really help bring a new generation of superintendents into the profession. So this year in Massachusetts, there are 41 new superintendents. First-year superintendents. There are actually 50 new superintendents in the district. So there's a generational turnover. And the Superintendents Association, I think many of you, maybe all of you are aware that there is this program. So it exists for new superintendents. And this is my third year in the program. And as a coach, it's incredibly satisfying for me personally. And I think very helpful for the new people. I wish that when I started at the business, I had a coach. It was a much more forgiving environment in 1979 when I started. Very, very different world, very complicated today. And it just seems like you just can't make up the stuff that happens. I mean, look at your beginning of the school year. Who could have, it just seems like that's the way the world is. It's just that there are so many unpredictable things that happen. So in this coaching relationship that I have 3 first-year people and I have 2 second-year people. And it's a 3-year program. The third year, it is an individual coaching. They meet as a group. The first year, I have approximately 6 hours a month. So I'll be here twice a month. And when I'm here, my meetings I always ask the superintendent to have an agenda. What are some issues that they want to talk about? I always follow up on issues that we talked about at the previous meeting. And then we spend time visiting schools, meeting with principals, attending meetings. I'll meet with the central office team, et cetera, and really anything where I can be helpful. My priority is not so much giving advice as it is helping the superintendents think through, really empowering them to try to figure out how to do things. But I don't leave them hanging. So if somebody says, what the hell do I do now? I'll offer some advice.
6 hours are up.
Oh no, and it's also available by phone and email, and it's really whatever I can do to be helpful. And so, as I said, it's a real privilege for me. There are 12 of us who do this now statewide, and we also have I think there are about 8 content days. So next Wednesday, for example, we're all together, all 41 with the coaches, and we have it's really a curriculum that we go over. And just a little bit about my own philosophy about when people used to ask about the superintendency, what did you do as a superintendent? And sometimes I would joke and say, oh, well, it's actually a great job. It pays pretty good, and I just wait for it to snow. But seriously, what I like to think that I did was in the districts that I worked in, we had core values. And my job, more than anything, was really to help people breathe life into those values, that they shouldn't just exist as words in a document, but they should come alive in what happens every day in schools. And the way to do that and when I think of the program, there's sort of two foci in the program. One is around relationship building. And I know that Gilly, because you've been in the system for many years, it's a great position to be in, so he's not starting from scratch, coming in from the outside. And the other is developing a strategic vision for the district, which I know that you're inheriting something and you're going to continue to modify it. So that's really the superintendency as I see it. It's a people business, and a lot of it is about relationships with the various stakeholders in the system. So any questions you have? Happy to.
I actually have a quick question. I mean, obviously, Dr. Gilligan's been here for a while. We've got a strategic plan in place. He's got the relationships with, the administration that's here. How different is that from your perspective with someone who's really kind of walking in brand new, like in terms of the coaching pieces? I mean, obviously, he's got those relationships and that foundation that he was part of and helped build.
Right.
So how do you now coach him to kind of
So
put his stamp on it?
Within our 41 people, we have, I think there are about a dozen who are in his situation.
Oh, wow. Okay.
So, because the program has been in existence for, this is the 9th year. So there actually is a cohort within the cohort like that. And So that's just really, that's the context that we work in. You know, I mean, I always think the context matters. You know, communities are very different, districts are different, and I think it's actually easier than coming in fresh from the outside without any relationships and without inheriting any kind of strategic vision for the district. So in terms of the strategic work, it's an opportunity to revisit it, to refine it, make some changes in it. The entry process, which this is the major focus right now, is around the entry plan, which you talked about that with them about.
Yeah, we brought it to them last May for approval.
Right.
And then
So
we had an update.
I mean, essentially that, I always think of that as like the superintendent is the anthropologist. So he's going to spend the first few months here just sort of nosing around, asking questions, try to figure out what the norms are, what are some things we're doing really well, what are some areas where we have challenges, how can I be helpful, and not me, but as a superintendent, and what expectations do people have for me. And so he's going to develop, and systems, I always say schools either are getting better or they're getting worse. So whatever the snapshot in time is right now for North Andover, he's going to be taking a close look at that and try to figure out where, you know, how do we move forward? How do we get better from where we are?
Great. Thank you.
Mr. McDevitt, I'd just add that the nice piece is that I think Matt's met me where I am, and I think that individualized piece of where different folks are, because some of the programming you have in the packet linked in over a 4-page overview of what we do in the program. Every superintendency is so unique or different that some folks are literally starting from scratch with no vision, no plan, and starting a strategic plan from the ground up. Others are inheriting, taking over. So really this has been, the entry's been great in terms of a needs assessment of where we are. And I had the good fortune Matt came to my entry meeting with the high school PTAC, not PTO because they're the PTAC. And Helen was there, so it's been pretty good.
It's actually, the other thing I just want to say, 28 years as a superintendent, I love my job. It was extremely satisfying and kind of work, and it's very, very important work, as I think you know, because you're volunteering to be here and do this work. There's nothing more important than helping the next generation. And I have great confidence that Dr. Gillian is going to be able to also find the work satisfying.
It's interesting to think, did you say you started in 79 doing this? So that was just after the blizzard of 78 and before Ed Reform of 93, before Prop 2.5. So it really was a very different
Before
educational
cable
landscape.
television.
Before cable television, before MTV.
Yeah, right. Well, you know, actually, I would say cable television was one of the biggest changes, because before, the school committee and I used to just sit around a table.
Oh, I see, yeah.
I mean, that's the way it was in most places. We just sit around a table, but then when, television comes and everybody ends up talking more to the TV than they do to each other. So that's one of the complications. Social media, I mean, there are all kinds of changes. But it's all good. Our schools in Massachusetts, you know, we should feel fortunate. I mean, we have, there's a general consensus about the value of education in this state. And while, you know, we have our challenges, but overall, you know, I think we do a very, very good job. And there's more agreement, there is disagreement.
That's great.
Any other questions?
Appreciate you being here.
Very much.
No, thank you.
Nice to meet you all.
Thank you.
Hope the rest of the year is quieter for you.
So do we.
Exactly.
Thank you, Matt. And under the superintendent's report, just one more update. So one of the goals we talked about that we're voting on tonight, I think tonight's the third night, or fourth night maybe we're revisiting since the summer, was developing new partnerships. And I want to give you an update on a partnership that I'm exploring with the Department of Children and Families, DCF, out of Lawrence. Currently, North Andover only has 2 foster families for short-term foster care. So I had an opportunity to meet with Brenda Fitzgerald, and I'd like her to come to a subsequent meeting to talk about this programming. But right now, for example, in North Andover, we've had several instances and cases over the last 3-4 years that I'm intimately aware of, where for no fault of their own, a kid is placed in foster care. We have to provide transportation back in North Andover, which is costly, but more importantly, they're put in homes in Lawrence, Lynn, Lowell, Worcester, as far as ways, and we have to transport them. And it's not the best environment in terms of that kind of shift. So the state got a grant, and they're really promoting this. I found out about it, was able to reach out and meet with 3 people from Lawrence a couple weeks ago. And we want to work together to promote what it may be, so that maybe some other families may be interested in being short-term foster parents here in North Andover. Therefore, if we have kids in our district that go out, or for whatever particular reason are placed in foster care, particularly in the short term, they'll be able to stay within the community rather than have to be bussed in or put in other homes, sometimes where they don't even have the same language in the home.
Right.
So it's very disruptive to our students' families. I've seen it time and time again, and over the long term, North Andover just hasn't had. There's been some very dedicated foster parents. I know you know former Selectman Frank Stewart. I think he's had 72 kids. Don Stewart, and Frank's the painter.
Don's the painter.
Don and Frank.
I know Frank's the painter, but Don's, yeah.
Anyway, to make a long story short, I think it would be really beneficial if we get that info out there, because there are kids in North Andover that people may not know, but end up in short-term or longer-term foster care, and they not only is that significantly disruptive to their lives, they're also out of the community, even though they're still going to school here.
Right.
So, if that's something that you folks would support, not looking for a vote or anything, I think it makes sense for our community, it makes sense educationally, it makes sense for our kids. And with DCF and Lawrence, with this money to push this and do some promotion, I'd love to work with them and go full tilt to be able to provide those opportunities.
So just one, I mean, does it, is there collaboration with things like the youth center? I mean, like what other parts of town are then kind of involved with that?
So across the entire district, if we have kids that are in foster care, we work with everybody from Rick Gorman to coaches to teachers to bringing kids to activities and those types of things. It's really the component that's missing is as much as we continue to include them, even more so than they may have been before foster care, they're going home on a bus ride 45 minutes.
Okay. All right.
And what seemed 20 years ago, what seemed like a half-an-hour ride to Lynn is now with the traffic.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, and when they get there, they don't have any connection with their peers that they're in school with, and they can't do after-school activities and other things like that because of the need to transport. I worked for a number of years as an advocate in the court system for kids in foster care, and I would 100% support this effort. It's really important, and we've tried so hard to get foster homes in the more affluent communities, and it's a hard thing to do.
Thank you.
Great.
Thanks.
That's it for the superintendent's report.
All right. So for the chair's report, we've already heard about NESPA this weekend.
You're a guest presenter.
I am. I have to write a speech, apparently.
Well, they didn't tell me that, so you're doing the speech.
I thought we both were.
Oh.
Apparently you have to write one tomorrow,
Okay,
too.
yes.
NAPAC is meeting the first Friday of every month, so that's coming up on October 5th at 9 o'clock in this room, and that's for it's Parent Advisory Council for Children with Special Needs. And then I'd like to announce that our school committee meeting on November 29th is going to be held at the Senior Center.
Oh, awesome.
And it's going to be a morning meeting at 9:30 a.m. So for those of you that have a difficult time coming out at night, this is your chance to come to a meeting during the daytime. And we're looking forward to that. And then I would be remiss if I didn't acknowledge Dr. Gilligan's role in the recent gas explosions. He talked about all the other town officials being out and being cooperative, but Dr. Gilligan worked that entire weekend to get our schools open on Monday, for which we are all appreciative. And he was always accessible, he was constantly giving updates, and he was just always present, ubiquitous that weekend. So I would like to thank you for that. And you are really setting a high bar this month for the start of your tenure. And then finally, I'd also like to thank all the schools for opening their doors and their showers and their warmth to all the students that need that and the families that need that. It's been a great collaboration in town, and I'm very proud to be a member of this town.
Can I ask a quick question? Actually, it's probably to Dr. Gilligan. The the schools generally have a response to families who might be in particular need at this point. I imagine the nurses, the guidance department, that they're responding specifically to specific families.
Yeah, so we worked really closely right up front with principals on that first day to gather information. As I sent in a letter Sunday morning, parents to the immediate need for families that were displaced were really being taken care of by the emergency management, the Red Cross. We knew that the longer term needs, so as those families have contacted principals and as we have become aware of different addresses, because it goes beyond just gas. I mean, there's tons of people without gas, but there were several working fires, legitimate working fires where homes have been destroyed, but there were also dozens and dozens of short-term fires, like the furnace or the boiler was on fire. It was put out quickly, but then the soot and the ServPro and the folks that have to come in. So, in my notice to staff that first weekend, I had to tell them on Saturday, guys, we don't know what we know and we need yet for our families. So all the diapers, all these different things, although it feels good to get those done, we need a more coordinated effort. Secondly, we also knew that this wasn't going to be a typical event where we're collecting a few gift cards, giving them out. We're talking about millions and millions of dollars in funds. We knew that the response would be overwhelming. So early on, from Friday through Tuesday or Wednesday, we met almost daily via telephone. Rick Gorman from the Youth Center, Stevie Nugent volunteered from the high school as a point person, myself, Jim Mealy, and Andrew Mailer. And we knew that taking in $10,000 or $15,000 in gift cards, which was a real possibility, because that's what folks needed. They didn't necessarily need clothes. They needed gas. They needed restaurants. They needed. We had to find a way to be able to do that and be accountable to it too, because that's the way it is. So the selectmen got together one night with Jim Mealy, the Youth Center, etc., and they were able to use St. Mike's kind of as a distribution center because of their charity work. St. Mike's volunteered. So we've been funneling everything through them, but principals as well as guidance, everyone else has been working with those families for whatever they need. Lorene is the homelessness liaison, is also, we're working on, we have to provide transportation for a few families that are now out of town, going to be out of town for a while, so we're providing that type of transportation. And it's really going to be an ongoing effort. I think for some of the folks with gas, they're going to get back in at some point. More concerning are the folks that may not be able to go home, particularly apartment dwellers, folks who live in apartments that have been really, there's been a few down on Main Street, Ashland, Middlesex, Beverly, Union, some significant fire damage or smoke damage. So we'll work with them closely along with the town manager as well.
Thank you for taking the lead on that.
All right, Mr. Tracy, do we have a school building committee update?
I was just gonna make a suggestion, maybe we take,
I was thinking the same thing.
yeah, we'll
so-
come back to me.
Okay, great.
Take Mazikin out of order.
Okay.
Better. She's the only one in the audience, so.
Yes.
I appreciate that.
No worries.
We are going to skip down to old business.
She just kept coming up in the chair.
I know, we noticed that. Hint, hint, I'm here.
And no zoning board tonight.
No planning board.
Planning
board. Planning board.
Last time I was on the planning board, I didn't think I would do that for that long.
So we're going to skip down to C under old business and do the second reading of our school policy, of our policy manual updates.
I can actually help you a little bit. So, if you wouldn't mind opening the military children, click on that. Oh, you already did, Jim. Great. So, we made a quick change that had been proposed last time that just didn't make it into the packet, which was the redundancy of active duty personnel. It was indeed a redundancy, so that's being taken out. And then there was one more where we changed may to should, which had been brought up last time. So those changes were made. We checked with Suzanne.
Yes, and those are all compliant with the school district's obligations.
Right. Okay. And then the same thing, which is in your packet, is the children in foster care. There was may do something by 30 days, but now it said should. I think it says should as well, right? Wasn't?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yep.
Oh, no,
That's
this was the one.
regulations.
We changed the wording. The law requires that students in foster care continue,
opposed to
rather
foster
than
care
foster care students. So that was the only, I think, change that we requested there, and that was taken care of as well.
Okay. Should we vote on those now or go through all of them and then vote?
We have to do them all individually.
I think we do,
So
right?
should we
Yeah.
just
Yeah.
We'll just take those two now then.
Take those two.
Okay.
So sorry. So I'll move that we approve the education opportunities for military children policy JFABE as approved, as presented in the packet.
Second.
Motion by Mr. McDevitt, second by Ms. Picard. Any discussion? Do we do a roll call for this?
Yep.
Okay.
Yep.
Mr. Treasy?
Aye.
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 So I will move that we approve the educational opportunities for children in foster care as presented in the packet.
Second.
Policy JFABF.
Sorry. Second.
Motion by Mr. McDevitt, seconded by an eager Ms. Picard. Any discussion? Mr. Treasy?
Aye.
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 For the minutes, just one other thing. There had been a couple of questions from the last meeting about how long we have to retain those, and I think it's at the attached at the bottom here, but you also have a handout of the open meeting law requirements. So, I guess we didn't.
So everything in this is already compliant with the law?
Yes. The question was, how long do we have to keep minutes, which is permanently? How long are recordings kept? 6 months, even though I think they're on YouTube much longer than that. I found them from many, many years ago. But we're required to keep them 6 months. Yeah, those are the key things.
Can I ask a question?
Sure.
So I remember way long ago going to basically a school committee introductory meeting that the Massachusetts Association put on, and that all of our notes from the meetings had to be kept as well. So, I mean, I have...
Do you mean the committee members' individual notes?
Correct.
Your personal notes?
Yes. So I know that there's minutes and all of those, but I'm just wondering, is there anything about that?
So personal notes are not considered public records if they're for your own individual information that you keep
Okay.
for yourself.
All right.
But if it's notes that are committee business, that any documents or records that are considered at a meeting become a part of the minutes and should be attached there too and kept as a permanent record. And that's part of the public records law.
But my copy, then...
Oh, your particular copy?
Yeah.
No, we just need one copy. That's
I'm
it.
going to have a big bonfire.
See,
Exactly.
I read this
That's
today
like
as
8
well.
years worth of this.
Yes, I'm sure you do.
Oh, exactly.
Wow.
Yeah, no, just one.
But if we take notes on the actual pages, like if I write things on this page, then do I need to save the page that I wrote notes on? That was
No,
my
because that would be
understanding.
for your particular, for your own particular use.
Okay.
And not for the committee's use. So
Okay.
if if you took notes and then it was adopted by the school committee and then we turned those into a permanent document and that was used as a committee, then yes.
Okay.
But if it's something that it's your individual,
So like our little notebooks that we have here.
It's our personal business.
it's your personal.
Okay,
Yes.
all right. I remember there being something about that, and I've just kind of kept it from everything, but now that you're here, I thought, let me just get clarification. So,
Yep.
perfect, thank you.
So I'll make a motion to adopt the revised minutes policy as presented in the packet.
I'll second that.
Motion by Ms. Mably, seconded by Mr. McDevitt. Any discussion?
Bonfire.
Mr. Treasy?
Aye.
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 Aye. Okay.
And this one I don't think we had any.
discussed the rest of these. You know.
Right. Other than, we did talk about vaguely the student activities account, but if there's anything important you wanted to point out, Suzanne, the key thing was that it was massively updated.
Yes, that it is updated and it does lay out sort of a process for how those activity accounts should be handled. And I think what it does is it it makes it much more transparent as to how those are handled, those activity accounts. And I believe that they were also, the policy was also sort of incorporated into the existing policy as to how those are handled by the school district.
As I had indicated last time, it was at the request of the auditors last time we had the external audit done for our student activity accounts. So this is consistent with that.
So I'd like to make a motion to accept the student activities account revised policy as presented in the packet.
Second?
Motion by Ms. Mably, second by Mr. McDevitt. Is there any discussion?
So I just have one, it's not a policy, it's more of a practice question, and maybe just an encouragement. The graduating class funds that need to be requested by the class officers within 2 years after graduation, it would be lovely if they got a reminder.
They do.
Then that's great.
I was just talking to a high school principal about that, and he was in touch with them.
So it's a busy time of life, and there's a lot of changes going on. They may not remember that they need to pick up the money. And they'll want it later for,
Reunions.
for a scholarship or reunions or, remembrance of classmates or whatever. Thank you.
So the part about the school committee having to vote annually before the school year on the maximum amounts, is that like starting now going forward?
Yes, that would be starting now.
Okay.
Once you adopt the policy, then you would start acting on that policy.
Will we need to catch that up for this year or no?
We will.
Yeah,
Okay.
yes.
Ready to vote?
Yes.
All right. Mr. Treasy?
Aye.
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 Aye. Okay, motion passed 5-0. Personnel policy.
And we did not talk about this because you're not
Okay.
here.
So I can talk about this. So I worked with Carrie Wahlberg, the HR director, in updating the personnel policy. And as we went through it, and what we did is we incorporated the most recently adopted school committee policies, incorporated those into the handbook. And then also, there were the policy was dated to a certain extent. They had some dates back to 2012 that we deleted and just brought it up to date with more of what the practices at the school district in terms of the personnel practices. I think the major thing that we incorporated was the crowdfunding policy. We put that in there. And then also the new Parental Leave Act is incorporated in that also. And you adopted the crowdfunding policy, the school committee did. Parental Leave Act is adopted, it's a state law, required to be incorporated into this handbook. So no real major changes in this.
Is there anything that we need to put into contracts as addendums or updates with anything?
That's a good question.
With regard to any changes into the personnel, no, because I think what the Parental Leave Act was, I believe it was already adopted and it was already discussed within the
Carrie was
contracts,
very
yes.
diligent in making sure that we were consistent with this language
Okay.
in negotiations.
And we did track it. While we were reviewing this, we were looking at the existing collective bargaining agreements.
I don't see anything that's different from the contract, but I just didn't know if there was any, I couldn't remember if the contract referenced this as well.
The Parental Leave Act or the policy?
No, the whole policy. I didn't know. So we've obviously got contracts in place, and we've got this, but does our contract reference this?
The multiple contracts, I believe, I can't tell you that for a fact, but I believe it does. I know that on the town side they do, and I assume that on the school side they also do.
Because what I'm thinking is if obviously we make an update to, we can make an update to this much easier than we can make an update to the contract. We really only open those contracts once every 3 years. But if there was something like a law change with the Parental Leave Act and the contract actually referenced, that this supersedes.
So the law would control.
Law supersedes anyway,
Right.
right?
So
Okay.
if the Parental Leave Act, the school has to comply with the Parental Leave Act, or whether or not it's in a collective bargaining agreement.
Gotcha. Okay.
I don't think we actually reference our policy. I think we reference
I don't think
this
so.
language right
Right.
here,
Mhm.
General Law, Chapter 149.
And a lot of these provisions are in the contract.
Yes.
Right, I'm just thinking, what if it changes next week? So,
Well, and my question is
Oh.
kind of related to that is, okay, so just like parents every year have to sign, or the kids have to sign, I read the handbook. Do we now then, once this is agreed upon, redistribute that, and do people have to acknowledge that they've received it, or any of that kind of business? What do we normally do with a policy handbook?
That's a good question. And one of the questions I had coming into this, since a lot of this is law, and we do have school committee policy, is this more of a personnel handbook? Or, I was always curious about the name personnel policy, is the title of this, you know?
So I believe as a part of, and you would know this more than I would because, but as a part of sort of the teacher training portion, this policy is referenced in that PowerPoint, and I believe
Yes.
so that is referenced and people are directed to read it.
So
and
as a
it's-
district, we do online, we used to do in-person training every year. We cover everything from 51As to policies to handbooks to the component. Now we have a complete online training that every teacher completes in the beginning of the year. It's pretty lengthy.
But I guess adding the crowdfunding thing, like if someone has been here for 20 years, that's new to them. And are they given this and actually asked to make sure you realize and actually get a red line copy to see what's new? Otherwise, they won't know.
Question.
Yeah, I don't know if we've done that in the past. I think the last time this was updated was 12, and prior to that, 9.
Because it seems good, smart to me that since we've updated it and it hasn't been since 2012, everyone should somehow receive it. I don't know. It's
Or
up
at
to
least
you
an
if they
addendum of
acknowledge
the-
it.
Yeah.
Right.
right.
I
Added
do believe,
provisions.
was it last year, we did change the school committee policy around crowd?
Yes,
Yeah.
and that's
Yeah.
that's why this is in here, because it's
Yep.
really related to their activity.
And we can take a look at that. I can talk to Carrie about that. and get more
Okay.
information.
Make sure it gets distributed to them and they acknowledge that yeah. Okay.
Any other questions?
Nope.
I'll entertain a motion to accept.
Oh, sorry. I will move to accept the personnel policy handbook as presented in the packet.
Second.
Motion by Mr. McDevitt, second by Ms. Picard. Any discussion? Mr. Trizzi?
Aye.
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 All right. Thank you, Suzanne.
All right, thank you. Have a good night.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
And now we will go back to our original order and the school building committee update.
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. We're almost there. Had a walkthrough today with Mary Lou, the principal up at the Bradstreet, along with our OPM, our architect, and the super from Triumph, and went through the final punch list items that are in. Take the kitchen out of the way for a second. Everything else, there's a few little odds and ends that need to be tidied up, but they think by Saturday they'll get to those, and those the little things like tiles being out of the sorts a little bit, and I think we had some condensation on one of the units that was. It looked like we had a leak in the roof, but they're going to fix that on the weekend. The reality is, I think Dr. Gilligan made a good call. A lot of the work that we had hoped to had completed already, we asked them to put off and just do it on the weekends, so we don't disrupt classroom time for the teachers and the students there. So I would say the building is 99.9% complete, except for the kitchen, which continues to be I don't know where Jimmy can help me out with this one. It's
On our side.
yeah, thrown on our side. Yeah. So we've had to do a couple of changes there. I think we have a lot of equipment up there that trying to make it fit, and I'm not sure it's all going to fit. So we need to, and the contractor's staying on board to do that. Obviously, that's part of their job. So they'll still be there to do that. But the kitchen is probably the last as far as the building goes. The site work, which everyone sees, drives by, is a separate contract from the school building contract. And then that's another great example of, we thought they'd be out of there by the end of September. I think I've told you that. That is not going to be the case. They've cut back on their work because of, and again, Greg has made it clear to the contractor that they can't do certain things during the school day, just the traffic tie-ups and whatnot. So they're working, they're still there during the week. I'm not saying they're not doing any work during the week, but a lot of their major work is going to be taking place on the weekends. So this is a town manager. Our retiring assistant town manager has been overseeing that, and his best estimate thinks it's going to be the second or third weekend in October when that's completed. So that is a little disappointing. It's a month later than we had told you folks, so I apologize for that. But it's mostly because of we're doing less work during the work week. Do you want to add anything to that update, or?
I think that covers it.
Yeah. I want to stress again, the cooperation from Lorraine and everyone here at central office helping out with everything, the smallest things up there. It's been going above and beyond, and a big thank you to all the teachers who have shown a lot of patience. It's not easy, but I will say, I was there for about an hour today, and the kids seem very happy. They're kindergartners, so I think they're generally happy anyways, but it made it really worthwhile to me to see the kids in action up there. So hopefully we'll get done soon. It's been a little bit of a grind. It's like waiting for it to be done. Ready to start a new project at the middle school, hopefully. But it's good. It's good.
Mr. Teresi, does doing the work on the weekends impact the price?
I can't speak to the site work because that's a separate contract that the
Mm-hmm.
town is overseeing, so I don't
Okay.
know how that. But as far as our contract at the school building, no.
Good. Thank you.
The kitchen is going to be a change order that we're still figuring out, how that gets resolved. But other than that, everything else is under budget as far as the school building committee's purview.
Fantastic, and congratulations.
Yeah.
Yeah, so the town is handling the site work, and Jim and I have met with the town manager and with Ray, and I think Ray leaves tomorrow at noon. But the town manager has been more than helpful in us working out, particularly the Saturday work. And a lot of work sounds like it's going to be completed in terms of the site work on what the town has proclaimed Indigenous People Weekend and Columbus Day Weekend. They're going to have 3 straight days. But they've made big progress, and it's made a big difference with just those sidewalks getting done.
Yeah. They were
and
pouring some asphalt today. I saw that.
So
They did that. And they're also, I think it's the same contract that's going to be doing the excavation for the Atkinson Playground. Is that correct?
Correct.
too? So that's coming along as well. And as you know, we bumped that playground up a year to get them, make them whole over there. So.
And the pickups and drop-offs have been smooth, Dr. Gilligan? Smoother?
it's under 20 minutes by car, which is about what it is at some of our bigger schools. Schools similar size of the Sergeant. It's really just a matter of, a lot of that's the routine. As we discussed, I don't know if we discussed, but we worked with the town manager where we had to look at some busing adjustments. And the town manager's been very, very cooperative with making things happen, particularly in terms of some other asphalt, some temporary parking, additional things like that. Jim, any other updates with that?
In addition to adding hard surface for the kindergarten students between the preschool playground and the Atkinson gym. So that's going to be really appreciated. An opportunity for them to have the hard surface for the kids.
Yeah. Good. Yeah, and also I want to acknowledge, Riley's been doing a great job. I think, him working less hours up there is because of us, not because of him. And also, I think the weather's played a big role. It's been a mud pit many days, and I think we get more rain tonight as well. So it's been challenging, to say the least, trying to get that site work done while school's going on. But I think they've done a great job, and I think it looks pretty sharp. The front of the building, the parking lot, the entranceway. I think it looks really nice.
And we made a decision as a team. Early on, the plan was for them to shut down a few minutes and drop off and pick up. And as a team up there every day, we made a decision saying, look, you got to shut down for an hour in the morning for drop off and an hour in the afternoon for pickup. It was the right thing in terms of everything that's right about safety, schools, drop off. And it's made a huge difference with that component. So,
Good.
Thank you. Okay, second reading of the overnight field trips, American Thought and DECA.
There was one question on DECA about, that I got the answer about, why Boston was more expensive. And DECA is regulated, it appears, at the state level by different states. And at the Boston one, not only does that include the hotel, but it also comes with a contract that requires meals at the hotel, etc. And that was the difference.
Whereas certain other trips, you're allowed to go and find your own restaurant, find your own plan, but they require you to pay for all that.
Yes.
It's helpful to know.
So I move that we approve as presented in the packet the overnight trips for DECA and American Thought. Question for the chair, are we doing all of them together or are we doing them individually?
Probably have to do them individually.
Okay, so I will move that we approve the American Thought Washington DC trip.
Second.
Motion by Mr. McDevitt, second by Ms. Picard. Any discussion?
Just a question, like my daughter is dying to go on this trip. Am I allowed to vote in favor of it since I have a personal interest? I can certainly abstain.
I would say yes.
I would say yes as well.
I would say yes.
I think you're covered.
Right.
Yeah.
That's cool. Good. All right. Thank you.
Mr. Treasy?
Aye.
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 So I will move that the committee approve as presented in the packet the overnight trip to the DECA competition in Baltimore.
Second.
Motion by Mr. McDevitt, second by Ms. Picard. Discussion? All right, Mr. Treasy?
Aye.
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 Aye. Okay, 5-0.
I will move that the committee approve as presented in the packet the overnight trip for the DECA competition in Boston.
Second.
Motion by Mr. McDevitt, second by Ms. Picard. Any discussion? All right, Mr. Treasy?
Aye.
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 I'll move that the committee approve as presented in the packet the overnight trip for the DECA competition in Orlando.
Second. Sorry. I just became confused because at one point there was a music trip that was supposed to be Orlando, but that wasn't right, so I
Right.
just
Yep.
had to catch up.
Okay.
Motion by Mr. McDevitt, second by Ms. Picard. Any discussion?
Just quick question. That is only if they make it that far trip, right?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Thanks.
All right.
Which they typically do.
Mr. Treasy?
Aye.
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 Aye, 5-0. All right. Second reading of the school committee and superintendent goals. Boy, it's only the second reading of this.
Well, I think it's like the third, but.
It's the third. But, yeah.
And the last time we had talked, we had really focused on, a couple points came up. One was the 100 visits.
All right.
And the
Okay.
quality. I think we keep the 100 visits in, but I'll be conducting those in the spirit that we discussed last time.
Right.
It's not just to check off a box with that there.
You probably have already checked off that box this
I think
this
I've
month.
had most schools, yeah.
Include Saturday.
Yeah.
I've learned more about gas and equipment and electrical than I ever knew before, so. But no, interestingly enough, I ran into Chris Allen at the retirement party yesterday, and she was talking about her time on school committee, how it was always frustrating how there were, she's saying, the goals, we had separate goals, and there were different goals, and this goals, and I said, well, now we have shared goals, and common goals tied to the strategic plan, and I think that makes a lot of sense.
Did she think about it?
She did. Yeah. Now a member of FinCom.
Now a member of FinCom.
So I will, we're approving, right?
We are.
All right,
Yep.
so I will move that we approve, as presented in the packet, the fiscal year 19 school committee goals.
Second.
School
Motion.
committee / superintendent.
Superintendent, yeah,
Slash
that's
superintendent goals.
Which is kind of funny because the way on this page it.
Yeah.
It leads with
top and
school
then the
committee
bottom,
goal, yeah.
Um,
Motion by Mr. McDevitt, second by Ms. Picard. Any discussion?
It's been discussed.
It has. Mr. Treasy?
Aye.
Mr. McDevitt?
Thinking.
Okay.
Aye.
Does it include Orlando?
Aye. Aye.
Aye. Yay, we are done with that one. All right, new business, I will turn it over to Dr. Gilligan.
Sorry, is there a budget?
Oh, sorry, I missed that one, thank you. Budget
Budget
update.
status update.
Yep.
Mr. Neely?
Yeah, so we don't yet have a budget status report. What I want to share is where we are in the process of putting together our really first budget status report for the year. And there's a couple of things that are going into this, and then we'll be able to share at the budget status report of October, which will have our regular budget status report. And this is what's really driving it, are the costs that were not anticipated in getting up a new school going. And so indirectly, I want to share with you the list that we're working on. This is not the real numbers yet, but this is what it's going to look like. Indirectly, a couple of buses need to be added. This was after a discussion with Andrew Mailer, and we were expressing concerns some people had as a result of the new bus routes that were put in place. There's discussion about permanent subs at the ECC, which is the model, the ABECC, which is the model that some elementary schools had gotten away from it, but it might make sense for this year for that school. The FF&E, you can see, came to about $112,000. That's got a note attached to it, which is the fact that the town manager had committed $100,000, so it just reflects the $12,000. That's the additional in that case.
What is FF&E again? I'm sorry.
So fixtures and equipment.
Okay.
Right. The number of bathrooms won't come as a surprise to anyone that might require us to add a little additional custodial time in order to keep the school clean.
How many bathrooms do we have there?
Well, one for every room at least,
16, right?
and then some.
And
They're
then
gonna-
some
there's
adult
one that's,
bathrooms, so
Yeah.
like
So we've got about
support
21, I
them.
think it is, in the new school
Tiny
alone.
toilets.
I've never seen a toilet so small.
It's amazing.
Reminded me of China, actually.
Well, they don't, yeah, you stay there.
Stop.
So just with that going over all of it,
Yeah.
David referred to the kitchen install is going to be a change order. The gas line that came in was a change order, not
Yeah, I
anything
know.
associated with what happened. There's some extra hours in order to have duties filled in the morning and the afternoon. That is going to result in extra hours for TAs, possibly additional TAs, materials and supplies. We added a copier, which is going to make a big difference, putting it in much closer to the classroom teachers. Comp time for staff. Staff has been, as David said, working with us to make sure this is successful, but it's meant losing some of their prep time, so we'd want to compensate them for any lost prep time. Custodial overtime was required in order to get the building up and going. We need to hire some new attendants and walkie-talkies. So we're putting the list together, and that will be more concrete for the budget status report. The other item that we're working on, Don and I met with Sandy. Sandy's last name is?
O'Connor.
O'Connor, thank you. Our out-of-district placement coordinator. And since August, which was our previous meeting, and now we've seen an increase of $302,000 already. One student is now costing us over $400,000. So the out-of-district placement is definitely more than anticipated. And so we will be, and we've already talked to our town manager, Andrew Mailer. We did not have the need to tap into the Special Education Stabilization Fund last year, but chances are good that if we are higher in out-of-district expenses than anticipated, we don't have the same flexibility from previous years because of the costs we're talking about here to cover those. So in all likelihood, we will have to tap into the stabilization fund this year. So
We've worked closely with Andrew, particularly around some of the unanticipated costs. You know, as much as a bus schedule runs and planned for last spring, in terms of the budget, when you actually run it and there's different components, you know, it's just a matter of timing with adding a new school online 10 minutes later, as well as transportation to St. Michael's School. And also in terms of opening the new building, There's just certain, there's some certain logistics that typically work in most of the elementary schools, particularly around morning inclement weather where kids go, in the space of the halls and those types of things. Usually, schools have 3 or 4 people on duty, kids are outside, or kids meet in the gymnasium. At this time, with 355-year-olds, the halls, all those standard size, are on the tight side. So we did have to look at kids actually going to their classroom in the morning versus some places like Thompson put them all in the gym. Kittredge has them in the hallway with a couple of folks on duty. But at the same time, when a staff of 25 or 30% is on duty typically in the morning, we need more coverage for 355-year-olds because of the layout of the building. We're going to have to put them somewhere. And the multi-purpose room is not really an option to house all those kids at once.
And just one other clarification on the out-of-district. While we're 302 more than we were in August, we did have some cushion. So right now we are 97,000 more than we had in the budget. And we're able to tap into the stabilization fund up to $250,000 in a given year.
And I'll have Dr. Straight, she just wants to add a couple of things in terms of the special education. Some of these, she had several mediations over the summer.
Quite a few mediations over the summer that were fairly successful for us. That kept me busy all summer. But just in reference to, in addition to what Jim was saying with regard to the student who's costing us over $400,000, we've had quite a few students move into district that are in placements that we're required for. Some of, so that you can account for that in a budget, a higher number than usual for a town. So we're working, as Jim said, we're working together and trying to manage those pieces while also looking at how we can manage the rest of our budget during the course of the year so that we're not in a position where we have a deficit or anything. But, just for clarification for the community as well as for yourselves, that in some cases when you have this high number of students move in, there's nothing you can really do about that.
When do we start basically applying to the state for increase in funds with the circuit breaker? Is that only in the springtime?
It's only in the springtime. It's a one-time a year.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't. For some reason, I was thinking there was like an incremental, like if you kind of hit a certain threshold by December or January, and then
A part of that in looking at it is understanding that when you get to a certain level that you increase the amount of monies that you can get back from the circuit breaker. So I've been working on looking at how we can restructure how we're paying things, what we're taking out of the grant bank for the grant in order to maximize to our best possible amount to get circuit breaker back. So it's another project that we've been collaborating on together.
The other part of it is that threshold is really high that you have to meet in order to qualify for additional funds. If you recall, the stabilization...
Is it called extraordinary relief?
Right,
Extraordinary
and the
relief,
stabilization
yes.
fund became a reality because of the year we had 3 or 4 years ago, which was a lot more than what we're seeing right now, and even then we almost reached it but didn't quite.
Well,
yeah, 3 years ago, yeah.
I thought it was 125% over.
25%, right.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
And that it's a lot when you're talking about $5.5 million.
Right.
Yep.
Okay.
And we're keeping up with our billable things that we can use for, is it Medicaid?
Medicaid.
Yeah.
Medicaid
Quite
is not,
so.
We will never lose sight of Medicaid.
Yeah.
It's, to be honest, that $400,000 we have up to this year is, it's a game changer in terms of curriculum. That being said, I have asked Jim and Donna to come back in October to give us an update of exactly where we are in special education. I think as Donna mentioned, I met with Donna last week, we had a couple move-ins and settlements or arbitrary mediation. We have 2 students that are almost $700,000 just for 2 students to meet their needs.
Can I go back to the kindergarten for a second?
Yeah.
You said we had 355 kindergartners this year?
355-year-olds.
5-year-olds.
5 years. 350.
350.
355-year-olds.
How many did we have last year?
327, I think it was.
323. So we typically range, and we track this really well, because remember the year we went to free full day K?
Yep.
Everyone said, that's it, you'll have 400 kids in kindergarten, and that year we had 303. So depending
I think it
on,
went down, ironically.
Right,
yeah,
right.
Yeah.
depending on when kids are born, our numbers stay about the same, but we have pressure points. This was on the higher end. We've hit this before, but we're typically somewhere between 300 and 350. That's why, if you recall, last April or May, we added the 16th classroom.
Right.
There was only 15 planned.
So I guess
In terms of step,
I don't know if you can track this, but if we had not done the Bradstreet School, where would most of those kids be?
So right now, we're already starting to plan for next year. We're looking at where the kids are now, where they belong, what schools they belong, as we
Yeah.
look to go to neighborhood schools. I can tell you this much: if we will be back with some of the principal feedback at the other schools about what they've gained, particularly in appropriate spaces, which has been pretty amazing. Secondly, not surprisingly, the principals have reported that the school years at all the schools have kicked off. As Karen Leahy said, swimmingly. Because they're not training any new parents in drop-off, they're not training kids to go places, kids who don't know their names, parents, a large percentage of these parents are first-time kids at school.
Sure.
So there's huge benefits on that end. But if we did not open the kindergarten this year with 22 kids in 16 classrooms, we would be looking at displacing
Right.
a much higher percentage than we typically do of kids from their neighborhood schools, because we'd have to find the space.
Yeah.
I think we would make it work, but you may see classes of 28,
Yeah.
27, and then also, which is challenging for parents all the time. They say, we're from Seattle, we researched, we wanted to be in this, say, the Sargent district. They bought a house out there, they plan to go to Sargent, and then they find out, I'm going to, Thompson or Kittredge because we're booked. So that's something we dealt with every year. But Lorene, who will be handling all this now.
He says with glee.
Short straw.
I did it for 6 years. It's always a challenge with new registrations, particularly with the transient population at Atkinson and Thompson to some extent, but also just the fact that prior to this building, Franklin just always seemed to cap off, no matter what. We had to move a huge amount of families, and what happens is they get moved, we have to provide transportation, and then they love the school they're in. So then they say, I want to stay here. So out of neighborhood, it's always been a great mechanism for the committee and for our office to balance off the schools. But last year, with 350 kids,
Yeah.
it would probably go back similar to the days of when I first was a principal a long time ago at Thompson. We had lotteries. We had to the superintendent had to move a few streets, just pick and move.
Right.
So
it's 308 to 350, or you said 320?
This is,
Last year was 308 kindergartners. This year was.
so you can see I highlighted the column. You can see it goes, we had 351 in 13 and 14, 335, and then down to 300, up to 342. The range is crazy. It's
Yeah.
between 300 and 350, as Gilly said.
It's
It was
a huge jump from
But this
last
is
year.
also, remember, this is the October 1 official state data. So they give us the official. This is, as you'll see, it says actuals as of October 1 because that's how the state reports it every
Right,
year
right.
and tracks kids for checks.
That's a huge jump.
Right.
From 308 to 350.
Yeah, I'd say last year, we can get the number, I think it was around 323
Yeah.
by the time
School ended.
the end of school ended.
Well,
Well,
and that
well,
significant dip in 2015 too.
Was 2015, that was the first year of free
342.
kindergarten, right?
No.
2015?
No.
It was earlier than
That
that.
was earlier than
Yeah.
that.
I think we saw that 13-14 was the jump from to free
I
kindergarten.
can tell you, because Rachel missed it, it was
Yeah, same
fifth,
forward.
fourth, third, second. I think it
It was
was
14, 15. I think.
14, 15,
Yep.
335.
Yep.
That was the first year of free?
Yes.
Yeah.
So it went
Full
down from
day.
351
Right.
to-
Right.
Correct.
And what we've seen is less of an increase between kindergarten and first grade. It used to be pretty big increase, like you can see 09, 10, 313 and 348.
Right.
Because it goes diagonally.
Right.
So we've seen a much smaller increase because most of the kids now are coming to us for kindergarten.
Yes.
Versus paid kindergarten.
Right.
And this doesn't go back as far, but I remember other charts that.
I do have others, yeah.
Yeah, but what we start with in kindergarten is pretty consistent with what we end at in K. There's a lot of fluctuation throughout the years, but it's really funny, like, if you look at the 12th grade now, or last year it was 377, and you kind of go diagonally up, we really kind of stay somewhere, there's some fluctuation, but I bet if you went back to kindergarten, as I remember, like, they're probably like 365 or something. I mean, so that's a pretty good projection, thank you, that's the chart I'm thinking of where we'll be in 12 years.
What are the pre-K numbers now? Are those numbers 120, the first one there? Is that pretty constant, Jim? Do you know?
That's pre-K, that's preschool, yeah.
Yeah, is that pretty constant though? Now it looks like the last few years we're around 120.
Correct, yes.
Because there's typically a waiting list, isn't there?
For the,
Yes.
For the pre-K, right.
Yeah.
It doesn't matter if you're the assistant superintendent either, you can't get your kids in.
Those kids are paid, and how many are free?
So Donna would know that. It's typically in the integrated model, is it almost 50-50, Donna?
It's a little bit higher. We're finding that there's a larger population of students who are coming out of early intervention, so that's a growing population as well, but you try to keep it around 50-50.
Good. I was at the senior center on Monday and I said it was 50-50. It was kind of a guess, but.
It typically has historically
It's a
been
balance,
50-50,
yeah.
but we admit kids to pre-K, I think at 2.9 years old, 2 years, 9 months.
2.8, yes.
And we've seen more kids, as Mary Lou's been telling us for a few
Yeah.
years, from that early intervention is recommending.
Right.
And what's the rate for the paid? Is it a monthly thing, or?
I think it depends because it's.
It is monthly.
We voted on this a couple of years ago, didn't we?
Yeah,
We raised
and it depends on how many days.
Right, we did.
someone
How many
does,
days,
and
half
if
days,
they-
full days, so it varies.
Okay.
Mhm.
Yeah, I remember we voted on it a couple of years ago. We increased it a little bit. Okay. Thank you.
All set? All right, new business. Dr. Gilman.
Okay, thank you. Last year, we came forward with a very similar request. I'm going to let Dr. Straight talk about it a little bit, but we are looking to increase special education teaching assistants by 4.0 FTEs. The specifics, I'll let Dr. Straight get into, but we're looking for 2 at the Brad Street,
Right.
and then an additional 1 at Atkinson and 1 at Sargent. Dr. Straight?
Right. So, again, you have no control over the students that move in and, what's on their IEP and their grid services. In the case of these 4 students, what we're looking at is we have some medically fragile children, too, that came in. And I'm not going to say which schools or where they're at, but just for the privacy of people that have a requirement of having one-to-ones that we need to provide. And then we have other students that have moved in that have one-to-ones based on other types of needs, social, emotional, behavioral types of needs that, we need to provide. I was in Sargent for a couple hours today providing some assistance and observing some of these students just to understand what's happening in the schools. And, there's no question based on all the data that we've collected and the IEPs that come in that these are needs that we have right now.
Are these positions already posted?
So, no.
So these are, I didn't want to be presumptuous as to recommend suspending the rules like you did last year at this time. So I figured that someone might bring that up. It's totally at the pleasure of the school board. But these are needs, as you know.
Immediate needs.
We opened the Brad Street also with the 16 regular ed aides. And we had some idea that, not at the time based on the IEPs, but now that the kids are actually there, that this, certainly we probably would need some. Jim, would you like to talk about the funding mechanism for this?
I think the school committee is familiar with the fact that each year we have turnover savings. That's what we would recommend we use to fund this. We've just calculated that, gotten all the positions now in place and figured out what we had in the budget for salaries and the difference between, for those who don't know, mostly teacher salaries of those who have left and are replaced. There's usually a pretty good sized delta between the salary amounts. So $78,950 is our turnover savings for this past year, and estimated cost of 4, bringing them on not for a full year but most of the year, would be $74,000.
I thought you were going to say the turnover savings was 74.5. So you're pretty close. So based on the fact that our next meeting is the 11th, and then our ability to post and fill these positions, I would move that we suspend the rules so that we can vote on this tonight.
Second.
Motion by Mr. McDevitt, second by Ms. Mably. Any discussion?
I was just louder.
Mr. Teresi?
Aye.
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 Aye. So that was the motion to suspend the rules. Now we need a motion to approve this.
So I will move that the school committee approve the requested additional positions for the remainder of the 2018-2019 school year as presented in the packet.
Second.
Motion by Mr. McDevitt, second by Ms. Mably. Any discussion?
Just as Mr. McDevitt emphasized, this is only approving the positions for this year. They would have to be included in the budget process coming up.
But we typically incorporate that in as a level set.
Often, yeah, more often than not. And we've had that discussion already that we need to really figure out the TA situation as part of the budget process.
Yeah. Okay.
That's good.
Any other discussion? All right, Mr. Teresi?
Aye.
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 And aye.
I thank you, and the principals will thank you.
Sure.
Great.
Okay, next is our first reading of the band chorus overnight field trip.
Yes, the right band chorus overnight trip in Ms. Picard. So you should have that in your packet.
Mm-hmm.
So, I'm assuming that they're flying.
Yeah, it doesn't say that
It,
here.
it doesn't mention that. I'm not
There's no
assuming
way they're
they drive
busing to Nashville, right?
The only question, I think it's here, basically. So, because there's so there is a deposit that the students are putting in for this, but based upon airfares and all that, are we going through an agency that has insurance or anything? I'm just curious.
Let me find out from Ms. Durkin.
Okay.
I think that's how we've typically done it in the past, depending on.
270.
Some of our trips, I can't specifically speak to Dan, but I'll talk to Mr. Jackson and Ms. Durkin tomorrow.
Yep, and I apologize. It does say in the itinerary that they are flying, of course.
Right.
I was on the wrong page. About 1,500 flights are not confirmed yet. Okay.
Sounds like a great trip.
Yeah.
That's also, have we ever gone, 270 students gone on these? I know we've gone on some big trips to LA and whatnot, but this is a huge number. It's almost 300 students. Like 22 chaperones, if I'm
good
doing
point.
my math right.
LA was pretty large.
Yeah,
I think LA was bigger.
Oh, I thought
Yeah,
it was.
the full band and chorus to LA.
I didn't think it was more than 200, but I'm certainly wrong.
Bev, if you could check on that, would be great.
I'm just curious because that is just a big number. That's a lot of chaperones and.
Yeah, I think it was like 3 flights that basically.
Right.
I mean, it was huge.
Almost like 3 charters.
Right.
Pretty much. Awesome.
All right.
This is the first reading.
Yes. Now for a CREST update.
So our CREST collaborative representative from the school committee, I believe, unless you have to vote tonight.
We do need to vote on that
Okay,
tonight.
great.
I mean, right now I am, so.
Yes, Ellen has been. As we had discussed, I think, in the August school committee meeting, CREST Collaborative had asked this board if they would appoint the superintendent to be the representative. We discussed it at that time and thought it made more sense to continue with the practice of what we had was with Ms. Picard. And she's going to give us a CREST board update because she attended their first meeting of the year the other day.
So, I don't know how much you guys know about the collaboratives, but there are collaboratives set up in every region in the state of Massachusetts. And their 3 primary purposes are to provide special ed services for students that need out-of-district placement, professional development services, and regional services such as transportation. Those are the 3 things they do, and they do it fee for service to the districts. Our collaborative represents about 23 communities, and the board members are school committee members and superintendents. So they respond to the needs of the districts for out-of-district programming. And they've had, for example, a big increase in social emotional learning programs over the last few years. So there's a difference in fee for member and non-member placements of students. So we have a favorable fee because we're members. The first meeting of the year, this year we've been dealing, for the last few years, we've been dealing with some property issues. Crest owns one property and rents another property. So there's what the property that they own is currently on an RFP. If they get a buyer for that, they'll have some opportunities to make some changes about where they provide their services. They have 8 schools that serve preschool to age 22, and they do, all manner of services for medically fragile children, for school to work young adults. So they do just about everything, and they do it in these 2 locations. Both of them are in Methuen, which is relatively easy for a lot of folks to get to on 93. But they have talked about the limitations that they have in one of those 2 buildings. So that's been ongoing. It's challenging to find a site that's able to accommodate all the things that they want to do. So that's an ongoing thing that we've been working on and exploring for the last few years. We also just completed the first annual evaluation of the treasurer. One of the things that's different with the collaboratives and school districts is with the collaborative, the board is the direct employer for every person, the TAs, the director, and everybody in between. So we just did our first annual evaluation of the treasurer. We're starting our annual evaluation of the executive director. And we're starting negotiations with the instructional assistants over there. So I'll be serving on the team that's doing the instructional assistants negotiating team. So those are the things that are happening at the collaborative. I have a lot more details if you want them.
I am amazed by some of the things that they do. I mean, I know some students who've gone there, and it's just an absolutely fascinating place, and I just think it's a great resource. So.
And I would say, too, that we don't have all our out-of-district placements in this collaborative. We use a number of different collaboratives. Right. I know that Dr. Price was involved in a superintendent's learning group that was out of a different collaborative. But the Crest Collaborative, for example, has just done an ALICE training because not every district is as fortunate as we are to have such a close collaboration with our public safety officers. So there's all kinds of, there's a special education learning, lunch and learn, for special education directors and others. So they do a tremendous number of services.
Thanks for your participation in that, Helen. It's very important.
Thank you.
And you said we need to vote to keep you on?
You need to vote to assign somebody to do it.
I move that we appoint
Yep.
Helen.
I thought we did this in June when we reconstituted
Let's
our
just do it
people.
again.
I did too.
I second the vote for Helen.
So you can't back out.
Motion by Mr. McDevitt, second by Ms. Mabley. Any discussion?
Thank you for doing it, Helen. Yeah.
All right, all those in
Notice.
favor?
Aye.
Hi.
Excellent.
Awesome. I went to the meeting.
You said no.
It should be overruled.
I went to the meeting the other day, and there are some superintendents and some board members, but I got to tell you that Helen is really productive in those meetings. She asks a lot of good questions. She's a good person to have, so we're lucky
Thank
to
you.
have her.
Yeah, it was great. The last meeting, we introduced a number of new superintendents that are around the area. It was generous of you to come and
It was
spend a
nice.
little
There's
time.
new superintendents this year in Haverhill, Methuen, Lawrence, North Andover, Amesbury, Pentucket, Wilmington, Woburn, Peabody, Wakefield.
Okay.
Yeah.
A lot of them were
It was
there.
nice to meet them.
Yeah, that's good.
Yeah.
All right, and Helen, you're on deck again.
So, as you heard at the beginning of the meeting, North Andover proclaimed Indigenous Peoples Day, and I brought the original document with us, and if you would indulge me, I'll tell a quick little story. Last year, during the school naming process, I was fortunate enough to learn that we have, the land that we're on now was previously occupied by the Pennacook people. And when the court recognized Old Andover, which included North Andover and Andover, one of the people that they specifically named was a Pennacook member named Roger, or called Roger. We don't probably know his Pennacook name. He probably wasn't named Roger by his mom, but he was called Roger. And at that time, in the court document, Roger retained the liberty to fish and to cultivate 4 acres of land in North Andover. So when I look at this town seal, I now think of this as a portrait of Roger. And I've thought an awful lot about this, especially when we look at like the Anne Bradstreet School. We know a lot about Anne. We know when she was born and when she died. We know how many children she had, who her parents were. We know nothing else about Roger except for that he was granted this liberty. So it's part of the story of North Andover that we have an opportunity to tell, and I'm very thankful for the group of people that went to the Board of Selectmen and requested this. So if you would indulge me, I'll read the proclamation. And I'll tell you a few things that have happened since. But the proclamation reads, whereas the town of North Andover recognizes that the indigenous peoples of the land that would later become known as the Americas have occupied these lands since time immemorial and values the progress of our society has accomplished through American Indian technology, thought, and culture. And whereas the town of North Andover understands that government entities, organizations, and other public institutions should update their policies and practices to better reflect the experiences of American Indian people and uplift our country's indigenous roots, history, and contributions. And whereas Indigenous Peoples Day was first proposed in 1977 by a delegation of Native nations to the United Nations, sponsored by the International Conference on Discrimination Against Indigenous Populations in the Americas. And whereas in 1990, representatives from 120 Native nations at the First Continental Conference on 500 Years of Indian Resistance unanimously passed a resolution to transform Columbus Day into an occasion to strengthen the process of continual unity and struggle towards liberation, and thereby use the occasion to reveal a more accurate historical record. And whereas the United States federal government, the state of Massachusetts, and the town of North Andover recognize Columbus Day on the second Monday of October in accordance with the federal holiday established in 1937, now therefore be it resolved by the Board of Selectmen that the town of North Andover shall also recognize Indigenous Peoples Day on the second Monday in October. Be it further resolved, the town of North Andover shall continue its efforts to promote the well-being and growth of the American Indian and Indigenous community. Be it further resolved that Indigenous Peoples Day shall be used to reflect upon the ongoing struggles of Indigenous peoples on this land and to celebrate the thriving culture and the value that Indigenous nations add to our town. Be it further resolved, the town of North Andover encourages other businesses, organizations, and public entities to recognize Indigenous Peoples Day in conjunction with Columbus Day. In witness whereof, I hereto set my hand and cause the seal of the town of North Andover to be affixed this 24th day of September in the year 2018, signed by Regina Keene. And again, the seal with Roger on it, right inside. I would just let you know that I've had conversations with the public library, and they are very interested in sharing our local history and promoting Indigenous Peoples Day. I got a note from Mr. Poirier about the NAM's Geography Night, and so we will be having a map share station on Indigenous peoples. That's an interactive map. We'll also share the story of Roger and this proclamation at that event next
Thursday,
the 4th of October.
Yes.
I heard from Mr. Sheehy, who is the sponsor of the Race Amity Group. He's very excited about the Race Amity Group having an opportunity to work on this, as well as their spring event. He also has done a lot of curriculum research on local history, and some of the changes that are likely to happen at the high school. We'll be able to include more local history in our curriculum at the high school. And finally, our state standards for history were updated in February 2018 to include more opportunities for including the history of Indigenous peoples. So there are some really exciting things and opportunities for us in bringing a fuller understanding of our history and our current. Dr. Gilligan often says we have some number of languages that our students speak at home, which is really beyond English and Spanish, and it is very likely that a number of those languages would be indigenous languages, that our children here were born in a place where their parents' first language would have been an indigenous language. So we're not talking about dinosaurs here that no longer exist. Indigenous peoples are still influencing our culture all the time.
Thank you.
Really nicely said.
Thank you.
Well done. Molly.
Dr. Gilligan?
And last but not least, you see a revised copy on the overnight field trip to Nature's Classroom. If you recall, as I recall, and Bev pointed out today very astutely, we approved Nature's Classroom for last year, the previous spring. And I think after last year's trip with some logistics, Dr. Price had put together a small committee to investigate whether it was the middle school still wanted to participate or not. And the committee was going to come back to the school committee and report out. With the superintendent leaving and with the principal retiring, I think that's the reason they didn't come back. But the middle school, and I think Jim was involved, a few other folks, they overwhelmingly wanted to go back. And Bev and I today were discussing the field trips here, and she said, I've gone through all the minutes last spring, and I don't see an overnight approval for Nature's Classroom, which is happening in a couple weeks. Therefore, I contacted the chair and the vice chair and asked if we could get that on the agenda tonight, because it's something that came to our attention about 2 o'clock today. So approximately 270 kids will be attending Nature's Classroom. As you know, like I said, the middle school overwhelmingly recommended going back, particularly the staff input from the kids. And following that, there are some kids that stay behind. And I think as we reported out, I think at some point we talked about it last year, Pat McGravy coordinated an effort for those students, roughly almost under 100, that will be staying behind. And in addition to schoolwork, they had done work in collaboration with Rick Gorman at the Youth Center, some activities at Wire Hill, some other outdoor stuff locally. So,
good.
George, very nicely. It didn't take him long because they had been planning this. And George had done some carryover work with Joan on this and collaboration with Joan, but last spring no one put this in for approval.
So I think this is a great opportunity, but I have a concern for the kids that have special needs and can't be outside and hike and do things like that. And the alternative also sounds like it's outside and hiking if they're at Wire Hill. Do we have plans for kids that may require the use of a wheelchair or a prosthetic leg, or?
So I know here back at the school, certainly there's all sorts of plans for different activities, which are varied. In terms of the camp, I know last year Dr. Straight, and I also know that the school worked closely with them. If you recall, last year there were some particular issues around their ability to provide nurses and different accommodations for kids. It wasn't anything on the North Andover side, but Cheryl Barzak did wonderful work last year to make sure that whatever accommodations we needed for kids were taken care of.
And we actually do that for all trips for the students, making accommodations. Even this summer, we had a student going on an extended trip that we had to do some extensive work with the family and outside agencies, just to ensure that kids do have access and the opportunity to participate like
Right.
all the other kids, which is quite appropriate, as you say. So there's always ongoing work, those things.
So the kids who stay behind don't necessarily stay behind because they can't, they stay behind because they choose to?
Yeah.
It's actually against the law to have kids stay behind just to say you can't.
Well, I would hope,
You know,
I would hope it is, yeah.
But just for everybody's,
Right.
edification, that is something that we accommodate and work towards inclusion.
As a parent of a student that went last year, I can tell you, she said in the end, she's very happy she went, but it came down to the wire about her staying behind or not staying behind. It was her first experience to kind of like be away from home, like she hadn't gone to sleepover camp or anything. So I think some of the kids staying behind, like my daughter last year, she ended up going, but she was just nervous, even with reassurance from the different folks about going away for 3 days, not being at home. So.
But it's a family decision if they prefer not to send their children away.
Absolutely.
Yeah, but under no circumstances, we'll make it, you know, especially under the law, we'll make every effort. If you guys recall, I think last year, we had to send a nurse and compensate for a long period of time to ensure the safety and well-being of a student on a trip to California.
It was California.
Yellowstone?
Yeah, and we're talking about, we needed coverage more so than anyone could provide, so we had to have coverage, I think it was 24 hours a day.
Yep.
And we worked something out with the union in terms of compensation for that coverage.
So one thing that I remember, because if I'm incorrect, I think this will be the 3rd year that we're doing this. Or it could be the 4th.
Fourth, I think it's the 4th.
Last year, I feel like they all went at the same time.
3rd, you're right, 3rd.
And
There was a storm, electrical outage.
Right.
Something like that, but they, yeah, it might have been a storm actually, but I feel like all the kids went the same week, and the prior year they had been staggered like they are this year. So, you know, 1 week, 2nd week, 3rd week. And I'm just curious why we do it that way. Does that make it easier for any student who may stay behind? Does that make it easier for the school because it's now 1/3 empty? Mr. Gonzalez might like that. I don't know.
You know, I certainly think in terms of planning for students staying behind, in terms of there's a lot more planning, and the reason the faculty got together last year is this is more than just going away for a couple days. This impacts the entire operation of the school in terms of supervision, in terms of duties, in terms of lunch, in terms of a lot of things. So I believe the staggered is what works best. Although last year, if you recall, they even changed.
There were 3 destinations last year. There were different destinations.
I remember coming here, and there were some last-minute changes. It was the ice storm.
Right.
The October days that we were out of school last
Right.
year.
Well, the first year they did it, it was over the beginning of November. It was Arctic.
Yes.
You're right. It has only been 3 years that they've done it.
Yeah, I'd be curious after this, how because now we've kind of done it. I don't want to flip-flop. I don't think that that's fair for the staff, so I'd rather kind of make sure we get a consistent path going forward.
Yeah, I think it may be an opportunity, as last year, we had a group that looked at all this, and they were going to come present to the school committee last spring. Like I said, with the outgoing superintendent, the retiring principal, I'm sure that just somewhat fell off the radar after the trip. As we discussed earlier this year, or in August, this is a perfect opportunity not only to hear from staff members, but to have some kids come in and talk about this experience and gather more information.
But the study group did happen, correct?
Yes.
Yeah, so that is useful.
Yeah.
Yeah, I
So
met
we
with
have to
them.
assume that
Right.
this trip was planned using the information from the study group, even though it didn't make it its way all the way back
To
here.
us.
Absolutely.
I met with them at the middle school, and Catherine Gilligan's experience was very consistent with what the student testimonials were. Staff were overwhelmingly in support of doing, because there was a question about whether or not
That's why I thought it was.
continue. And everyone, it was a high percentage of people who wanted to continue from all levels. And then they did have those discussions about the logistics, what makes the most sense. So it'll be interesting to hear from them, but I think that's why we see it the way we see it this year.
Okay.
That's helpful.
New principal, you know.
Yeah.
I just,
And we actually, part of the discussion that I had last year with Dr. Price and Joan McQuaid is this something that a new principal should take on in their first year? And overwhelmingly, once we got the principal on board, talked to the group, it didn't make it here to the committee. And when Beth asked me today, I said, yes, we approved that in February. I remember it like it was yesterday. I was right, it was February, but it was
2 years ago.
So do we want to suspend the rules here?
We have to.
And vote on this
Yep.
tonight? Yeah.
Yep.
So I would move that we, I would move that Andrew move. I would move that we suspend the rules to approve this tonight rather than waiting for a second reading.
I'll second that.
Motion by Ms. Picard, second by Mr. McDevitt. Any discussion?
Aye.
No discussion, aye.
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 Aye. All right.
And then I would move that we approve the overnight trip to Nature's Classroom as presented in the packet.
I'll second that.
Motion made by Ms. Picard, second by Mr. McDevitt. Any discussion? No discussion. Mr. Treasy?
Aye.
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 Aye. Okay. Public comment? Seeing none. Final comments?
I have one thing just to mention, that the Middle School Fields Improvement Committee, which is working on the recreation complex plan, the next meeting is Tuesday, October 2nd at 7 p.m. on the first floor conference room of the town hall. And I know that some people at Atkinson were interested in that, and I've contacted them directly as well, so they'll be coming.
Thank you. Anybody else?
I would just invite everybody to come to Geography Night on October 4th at the middle school, starting at 6 o'clock. Is that right?
Yes, 6 to 8.
6 to 8.
Always a fun night. Anything else?
I'll just take a quick minute. I know we talked about this before, but I really want to say thank you, Dr. Gilligan, again. Whatever it was, 2 weeks ago now, literally no one had any idea what was going on. And I think between you and Mr. Mailer, the amount of information that you tweeted, that you disseminated, that just went out quickly in emails and robocalls, in making sure that our students got out of buildings, and thankfully it was a good weather day, but literally out of the buildings and onto the playground, so that parents knew that their children were safe, and the faculty were safe as well. And then to really spend Friday and Saturday and Sunday just making sure that the schools were safe. I think people were worried, could we open up if the school was still being a shelter, and trying to make sure people had the ability to get home and to get to places where they are. And then I know I talked to you a million times that weekend, but what are we doing to help our families, and not just students who are impacted by this, but we have faculty members who, in all regards, whether they're custodians and food services and teachers and administrators who live in these impacted areas, and just the amount of communication that went out was absolutely fantastic. And I know that it was an extremely collaborative effort between not only you and Mr. Mailer, but Chief Gray and Chief McCarthy as well, to just continuously make sure that we were informed and that people felt safe and knowledgeable, and I can't thank you enough for that.
Thank you. It's an amazing community, and the most important thing for us was, if we could safely send the kids back to school, it was helping our impacted families the most so they could deal with insurance, deal with their jobs. And I think it's a good point. We have several staff members impacted, significantly impacted, out of their home, and also folks without gas.
Right.
Still.
All right, Mr. McDevitt, I'll entertain a motion to adjourn.
Second. I'll move that we adjourn for the night.
Ms. Picard?
Second.
Aren't you clever?
Aye.
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 And aye.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Aye, aye, aye.